Part 2 of the story of Achitophel. This part of the story takes place 3 years before the passing of Dovid Hamelech, in the year 2921, which is 840 BCE. And at this point, this is after the incident with Bathsheba. And again, this class is not going to really deal with that, as it doesn't directly pertain to the story of Achitophel, even though Bathsheba was the granddaughter of Achitophel. The summary of the story was that Dovid Hamelech married Bathsheba under very mysterious or suspicious circumstances. Of course, the Gemara explains that Dovid Hamelech didn't actually sin, and that's a discussion for another time. But the point was, on his level, there was something wrong that was done. And Dovid Hamelech did tshuva for it for the remainder of his life. He continuously did tshuva for it. And Nasan Hanavi, who was one of the prophets of the time, during the time of Dovid Hamelech, came to him in the name of Hashem and told him that Hashem is going to give him trouble. And the trouble, that's what Dovid Hamelech picked, the trouble was he's going to raise up evil from within Dovid Hamelech's within Dovid Hamelech's own house. And that person is going to take Dovid Hamelech's wives before Dovid Hamelech's eyes, and he's going to lie with these wives in the sight of the sun. This was the punishment for Dovid Hamelech, or one of the punishments of Dovid Hamelech for the whole incident of Bathsheba, that someone from his household is going to rise up against him and assault his wives. And that's a small amount of context that's needed in order to understand the story. Now, a little bit more context, just to understand what was going on. Dovid Hamelech had many sons. His crown prince was a man by the name of Amnon, and Amnon had a very embarrassing story that happened with his half sister. And as a result of that embarrassing story, Avshalom, who was one of the eldest sons of Dovid Hamelech, killed him. He killed his older brother, and he ran away. And eventually he made his way back, and Dovid Hamelech forgave him, and he made his way to the capital city. And it's then the Navi says it was after 40 years. The question is, what is the 40 years? Because it wasn't after Dovid Hamelech's 40 years of reign, because we know that there was 3 more years afterwards. So some of the rabbis actually say that there was 40 years after the Jewish people had asked Hashem for a king. Hashem said, you want to see what it looks like, the ramifications of having a king, you're going to see what's bad, the bad side of it all, and the story of Avsholom then presented itself. And as you're going to see as the story progresses, Achitophel is going to be a massive and a key player in this entire rebellion. So 40 years after they'd asked Hashem for a king, this story happened. Some people say it was actually the age of Avsholom. Avsholom, the rebellious son of Dovid Hamelech, of King David, was 40 years at that time. And there's different calculations. That's a very interesting discussion. Avsholom was a mastermind. He was a tactician. He was a politician. He masterminded his rebellion very carefully and he made sure to ensure that no one was aware of his rebellion. Achitophel was one of the key advisors of Dovid Hamelech at the time. Avshalom wasn't sure whether he could trust Achitophel, as we're going to get to shortly. So until the rebellion was very well underway, Avshalom never invited Achitophel into it. All the initial planning was all something that Avshalom did on his own, and it was deeply manipulative. One of the things he did was, unlike the rest of the sons who, didn't really make a massive show, many of them, Dovid Hamelech, I'm assuming most of his sons were extremely righteous. We know some of the names of his sons, and these were extremely righteous men. He would ride with a chariot and horses around wherever he would go, with 50 runners running in front of him. In fact, he had the spleens removed and the soles of the feet of these runners removed in order to improve speed. He wanted to make sure that these people could run as quick as possible, so he had surgery on his runners, on these men that were dedicated to run in front of him, so that they could run extremely fast. He wanted people to know that he wasn't just a regular member of the royal family. The Hamelech says he made a show to show everyone that he's a whole step above everyone else. He would wake up early in the morning, and he would stand at the entrance of the gate. The gate is where the court was, where Dovid Hamelech himself would judge, and everyone was everyone recognized, even the people that didn't like David HaMelech all that much, they recognized that David HaMelech judged with extreme honesty and extreme fairness. So Avshalom realized that he needed to attack David HaMelech in the place that he excelled the most. So he stood by the gate and he would inquire the welfare of all these people. Now, princes, generally speaking, don't get up early in the morning. The princes sleep into very, very late. But Avshalom would purposely get up early, and he would flatter the people. He asked personal questions, and their mind was blown. Now, the royal prince, is just standing early in the morning and asking them how their day is and how their life is and where they come from, which city they come from. All these questions that Avshalom would ask them, they were so flattered to have so much attention by such an important person. Avshalom was an extremely handsome person. The Gemara talks about the most handsome people in history, and Avshalom and his hair. It's not really part of the discussion here, but Avshalom was in the count of the most handsome people in history. And what he would do is he would ask them about their court case. And when he heard all the details, he would insinuate that if he were the judge, he would judge favorably. Unlike his father, who was probably going to judge one of the sides, of course, guilty, because one person's right, one person's wrong in most court cases, and so he would tell both sides, if I were the judge, I would say that you're the right person. Now, a judge is forbidden to hear testimony from one side, one litigant, without the other litigant present. That's not fair. But Avshalom would purposely do that. He'd have one litigant, he'd listen to everything they said, he would tell them, if I was the judge, I would definitely believe that you're right. And then he would see the opposite person of that litigation and tell them exactly, he would listen to all their things, not in the presence of the other person, and tell them, if I was the judge, I would believe that you would be correct in court. So both of these people left with the impression that Avshalom, he believes them, he would trust in them. And even simple gestures, or whoever would bow to him, he would reach out and he would kiss these people. He showed extreme love to all these people, the common folk, which might sound like a really nice and wonderful thing, but in the case of Avshalom, it wasn't because he loved the common folk and he loved the plebes. In Avshalom's case, he was trying to garner support. He was trying to very quietly and very effectively sway support from his father and get people to just love him and make himself look like he was a man of the people. And he would insinuate that, he would ask what tribe you come from, insinuating, if you're from the tribe of Yehuda, if you're the tribe of Judah, the tribe of David HaMelech, well then, you have a better chance at court. He was trying to plant seeds of doubt against his father, and it was very effective, as you'll see shortly. Once Avshalom had actually planted the seeds of rebellion, and he gathered enough support of the people, of the spies, as we'll talk about in a moment, he now needed to get support of the scholars. He knew that the Jewish people that were a people of the Torah, and the nation of the Jewish people are not going to follow, especially in those days during the time of David HaMelech, such a incredible righteous man, that people are not going to follow someone who doesn't have support of the high court, or doesn't have support of all the Torah scholars. So he came to his father and told his father like this. He said, when I was exiled because of that uncomfortable story of him killing his older brother, he said, I made a vow to Hashem that if Hashem lets me return back to David HaMelech, he tells David HaMelech, he tells his father, I will bring a sacrifice in the city of Chevron. So that sounds like a very noble thing. So his father said, okay, so what do you want? And he said, I want 2 Torah scholars to accompany me. So his father was very impressed. That sounded like such a wonderful thing, such dedication to God. And so David HaMelech said, which 2 people do you want? I'll write a letter and you can bring it to that person, and those 2 people will come with you. And Avshalom said, I haven't decided which 2 scholars I would like to bring with me. So what we'll do is, you just keep it blank. Write a blank check. Write a blank invitation or a blank request to 2 scholars, and then tell them in that letter that you 2 men who Avshalom has reached out to, you're to go to the city of Chevron to accompany him for him to bring his sacrifice. David HaMelech didn't suspect that something duplicitous in his request, and so he wrote this request. And Avshalom went to 2 scholars, showed them the letter, and said, "My father wants you to escort me as I go to Chevron. Now they didn't assume that there was anything wrong, so they said, of course, David Hamelech wants us, King David wants us to escort his son to Chevron, of course we're going to go. And then he took that same letter, went to 2 more scholars, and he collected 200 members of the high court, a massive envoy, who all came along, each one innocently thinking that they had been personally requested by David Hamelech, and they were doing the bids of the king to escort the son to Chevron. But meanwhile, in the eyes of the populace, 200 members of the high court were all escorting the crown prince to Chevron. It looked like he had so much incredible support of the people who he desperately needed the support from. Before leaving Yerushalayim, before leaving Jerusalem, Avshalom set a network of spies across the country. And he told them like this. He said, when the signal is made, all of you to blow on shofars, and you to announce to all the tribes all across the country that Avshalom is the ruler of Chevron. And he told them, don't be alarmed, don't be worried. This is the way it is. And now people assumed that, and again, there are many different opinions exactly what Avshalom's plan was, but I'm kind of moving quickly along this because I want to get to the part of the story that deals with Achitophel. But people assumed, according to one opinion, that just as David Hamelech had made his first step in Chevron, and he'd been the king there for 7 years. So Avshalom wasn't really officially rebelling against the king. That's the way that Barber now brings, at least Avshalom's initial plan. He wasn't planning to really rebel against David Hamelech. He wasn't trying to do away with David Hamelech. He wanted to set himself in to be the official king. So he said, my father was officially a king of Chevron. My father's not going to green light me to be the next king in Chevron. So I'm going to kind of just take matters in my own control. I'll become the king of Chevron. I'll kind of garner national support, and then my father will have no choice. So he made the announcement that people shouldn't be alarmed. Avshalom is now the king of Chevron. People would just assume that David Hamelech had okayed it and green-lighted, especially green-lit it, with all the Torah scholars supporting him. It looked like this was the request of David Hamelech. And it could be possibly some of the commentators explain, and the Maimonides brings this down, that David Hamelech might have even been fine with it had this been just the plan that Avshalom would just be the king of Chevron. The men that accompanied him at some point realized that they had been misled, that there were a lot more than 2 of them that had come. There was 200 of them that had all come, and all of them had received the same letter, and they realized at some point, and they actually started praying for the success of David Hamelech. In fact, in Tehillim, in Pod Avshalom, you actually see a hint of that, where the people that had been misled and looked like they were on the team of Avshalom, they were praying for the success of David Hamelech, because they knew that, firstly, I'm assuming they knew that David Hamelech was righteous and Avshalom was a dreadful person, but also they knew that if they were to fall in the hands of David Hamelech would spare them. But if David Hamelech were to fall into their teams, into Avshalom's hands, David Hamelech wouldn't be able to have such a great fate. Once Avshalom had officially secured his supporters in Chevron, and had begun to sacrifice his karbanos, he called out to Achitophel, and he told Achitophel to join the rebellion. Now, the obvious question is, why didn't he call Achitophel from the get-go? Why didn't he just tell Achitophel, come join my team? The fact that he invited him later on is clear that Avshalom had an inkling that Achitophel would be a strong supporter of his. So why from the very get-go, why didn't he let Achitophel help him plan the rebellion from the very beginning? So the rabbis say Avshalom didn't trust him. He didn't know. Remember, Achitophel was a member of Yehuda. He was a relative of David Hamelech. They're also a relative of Avshalom. And Avshalom said, I can't afford for anyone to leak the news to David Hamelech that I'm planning this rebellion. So he said, until I have the rebellion down, one of the closest advisors to David Hamelech, Achitophel, I can't trust him to give him the information, because maybe he won't be on my team, he'll go straight to my father, and the whole rebellion will be over before it begins. So he said, I'd rather get my rebellion in works, plan it all out, officially declare rebellion, and then I'll bring Achitophel on board. If he wants to join me, fantastic. The most loyal, the most powerful member of support for David Hamelech, his wisest advisor, will be on my team. And if it's not, well, no harm, no foul. I tried to get him on board. So he sent news. He sent a message for him to join the rebellion, and Achitophel officially joined the rebellion. He left his city, he came, and he officially became a part of the rebellion. David Hamelech, meanwhile, hears about the rebellion, and David Hamelech realized that he has to leave the capital city. It's so tragic when you think of it, because David Hamelech was the conqueror of the city of Yerushalayim. It's the city of David. Literally to this day it's called the city of David. And he's been the king for 37 years, and now he needs to run from his own capital because his son has rebelled against him. And David Hamelech knows being in Yerushalayim, being in Jerusalem was dangerous. The rabbis give different reasons. The Malbim, for example, explains that David HaMelech just didn't know who to trust. He was inside the capital city. Anyone could turn on him. He didn't know who was an ally and who was an enemy. So many people who he considered allies. I mean, look at Achitophel, his most senior advisor, had gone over to Avshalom. He didn't know who to trust, and so he said, it's better for me to get out of the capital city because anyone could attack me from anywhere. The other reason that David HaMelech was so compelled to leave the capital city was he was worried the men of Avshalom and Avshalom himself would declare the city to be an enemy, the entire city, and then so many innocent people who would be loyal to David HaMelech would now be on the receiving end of the ire of Avshalom. David HaMelech said, the best thing I could do is just leave the city, and then no one's connected to, and only the people that follow me are directly connected to me, and therefore everyone else in the city is going to be safe. There's another answer, which is also really interesting. If you analyze the words a little bit, it's very interesting. The word vehidiach is mentioned in the pasuk, and so the rabbis say this is a hint that David HaMelech was worried. The Radak brings us down. He says David HaMelech was worried that Avshalom would declare the city ir hainidachas, an apostate city. Like the fact that they're loyal to David HaMelech, he declared the entire city a city of rebellion, a city of idol worship, and then Avshalom would use this as a pretext to slaughter everyone in the city. And David HaMelech understood that was a real possibility, and so therefore he decided, best thing for me to do is just to entirely leave the city, and thereby saving everyone from entirely getting wiped out. Not the loyalists and non-loyalists, everyone would get killed. And so David HaMelech said, I can't have that on my watch. And another answer, which is also a very interesting answer, comes from connected to the Medrash, and the Radak brings it down. He says that David HaMelech understood that Hashem was wiping the cup. Hashem was punishing David HaMelech for the sins of the earlier story, that unfortunate story that happened with Bathsheba. And again, David HaMelech didn't sin. I want to make that abundantly clear. The Gemara makes it clear. Anyone that says David HaMelech sinned was making a mistake. But on the level of David HaMelech, or whatever it was, whatever sin that David HaMelech perceived himself as doing, David HaMelech said, once Hashem is wiping the cup clean, to kind of wipe away my sins and give me punishment as a return, David HaMelech said, anyone that's going to be surrounding me is going to be hurt. So David HaMelech said, the best thing I could do is just leave everyone behind, and therefore no one's around me, and no one else kind of gets wiped out along as Hashem is wiping clean the cup. David HaMelech left the city barefoot, and he sang Tehillim. And the rabbis point out to the incredible love Hashem had for Hashem, obviously for David HaMelech, but David HaMelech towards Hashem. Even as he was suffering, he was still singing Hashem's praise. He was walking barefoot. One opinion says he was walking barefoot because he didn't want anyone to assume it was him. He knew that the entire city was riddled with Avshalom's spies. Avshalom had planned this very well out in advance, and he said the easiest way to go undetected, no one will imagine the king is that person walking barefoot through the cities of Yerushalayim. So he just looked like another person walking through the street, and he'd just go entirely unnoticed. And so David HaMelech walked barefoot, and as inconspicuous as possible, trying to make sure that none of the spies could track his movements, and he could leave the city as undetected. Additionally, David HaMelech had been put into a excommunication. And what's so interesting is, even though this was done by the enemies of David HaMelech respected it. So he made himself like he was in excommunication. He covered his head. He walked barefoot. The ban was later on removed by Ira of Yarite. It was actually removed by him later on, one of David HaMelech's teachers. But so long as it was in effect, David HaMelech actually took it very seriously. He treated it very good, and he brought his whole household along with him. But 10 concubines were left behind. And again, this is a discussion for another class possibly. But the concubines of David HaMelech they had the status of wives, even though they weren't full wives. The rule is a king can only have 18 wives. But later on in Divrei Hayamim, in the end, Ezra writes details of the story of the rebellion, and they're called wives over there. The ten concubines that David HaMelech leaves behind, they're called wives because he gave them full betrothal. So these were men that David HaMelech had actually fully betrothed, although they weren't full wives. He left them behind in the house. David HaMelech couldn't imagine that his own son would assault David HaMelech's wives. So David HaMelech didn't, according to one opinion, didn't imagine that there would be any problem with leaving them behind. So his family, he brought them all with him, but 10 of his concubines, he said, well, I don't need to bring them, they're going to be fully safe. Avshalom's not going to start killing his own family or assaulting his own family, and so David HaMelech left them behind. David HaMelech knew about the prediction of what was going to happen, but now that it was his son that had rebelled, again, David HaMelech just said it's impossible that he'd actually do it. Now, the whole bunch of things happen next, and I'm going to kind of summarize it quickly because I want to keep the story to Avshalom. The Crazy and the Placey, who were the official guards of David HaMelech, they're experts in sword, in combat, and they're also experts, of course, in Torah. They came out in support of David HaMelech, and Ittai the Gittite, who wasn't Jewish, who was from Gas, he came also in support of David HaMelech with his 300 warriors. The Barbanel brings down that he was Jewish. It's a discussion whether he was Jewish or whether he was not Jewish, but he was very dedicated to David HaMelech, even though he had recently come, and he insisted on coming along. And as David HaMelech walked across the countryside, the people literally followed behind and they wept. It was such a tragic thing. A king they loved so much was literally being chased out of the capital city, his own capital city, by his own son. The ark, the Aron, was brought along too. The two chief Kohanim, Evyasar and Tzaddik, or Tzaddik and Evyasar, they brought the Aron along with him because they said they don't want the ark, Hashem's Aron, that has the luchos, the tablets inside. They don't want this to be in a city where a son is rebelling against the father. And so they took it out of the city and they brought it to David HaMelech, preparing to bring the ark wherever David HaMelech went. Now, at that time, Evyasar was the high priest, was the Kohen Gadol. And he asked the Urim V'Tumim, he asked the Hashem, by way of the breastplate, for an answer about what to do, and he wasn't answered. And this became a very, very pivotal moment in history, because this family had been the high priest family for many, many years, since Pinchas, a long time earlier, had lost that right. And once this descendant of Eli, who was a descendant of Itamar, the fourth son of Aaron, wasn't answered by the Urim V'Tumim. He wasn't answered. Hashem didn't answer his question. Even though David HaMelech was on the run, David HaMelech understood at that moment that the high priesthood, that the Kahuna Gedolah had officially left that family and was now returning back to Pinchas's family, which at that point ended up going back to Pinchas's descendants. Tzaddik asked Hashem a question, and Tzaddik was answered. And David understood that the curse of Eli, which we're going to dedicate a few classes to in one of the later podcasts, David understood that the high priest, the Kuna Gedolah, was now officially going back to Pinchas's family. But David insisted that the ark return back to Yerushalayim. David said like this: if it's Hashem's will that I come back to the city, then I'll come back. And if not, then not. David HaMelech didn't want the ark to come follow him wherever he went. And David began to prepare his defense. He told Tzadok to prepare his son and Evyasar to prepare his son, and they should be ready that if they discover plans and plots that Avshalom had put into place when attacking his father, these two young boys, the two sons of now what are now the two high priests, they would be in a ready position to quickly run to David HaMelech to prepare information. David HaMelech needed info, he needed intel into what was going on with the plans of Avshalom, and he didn't yet have an official spy, but he needed scouts, he needed people to take the spy's information and bring it officially to David HaMelech. So David HaMelech told the two high priests, he said like this: take the ark back. If it's Hashem's will that I'll return to the city, then I'll be back reunited with the ark. If not, then not. But you go back before it officially becomes official that you're on my side. Bring your two sons as well. Let people not realize that you're part of my side. And if there's any news, if there's any reports to be had, your sons will be in a ready position to tell me what the plans and the motives of Avshalom were. Now, David HaMelech still wasn't sure what were Avshalom's intentions and what was his plans. Avshalom had kept his cards so close to his chest that David HaMelech wasn't sure. There are opinions that say that David HaMelech did know, and he knew that it was between two different plans, as we'll mention in a moment. And whatever the case was, David HaMelech definitely needed spies. He definitely needed more information, and he told the two high priests, "You go back, bring the ark, bring your sons along. Let them be the people that go back and forth." David HaMelech goes to the Mount of Olives, and the people that were loyal with him, they followed behind and they wept. And when David HaMelech realized that all the supporters were coming, David HaMelech looked out for his chief supporter, the person who he considered to be his closest friend, Achitophel. And Achitophel wasn't there. And so David stand down his opinions of how to translate this actual verse in the book of Shmuel Beis, where the David HaMelech asked about Achitophel, and then they investigated and realized that he hadn't actually joined, whether David HaMelech already understood that Achitophel had joined his son and had betrayed him. Whatever the case was, David HaMelech was extremely bothered. All the other people that had betrayed him, including his own son, it didn't bring David HaMelech any fear. It brought him a lot of sorrow. He had to leave his own city. He was in a state of mourning, and he was in a lot of pain, but there was no fear. David HaMelech was not bothered by it all, but Achitophel, the Medrash says, when he heard about Achitophel, he was worried. He was actually fearful of Achitophel. He was such a close friend. Achitophel was such a close friend of David HaMelech. He knew King David's deepest secrets, and David HaMelech at this point actually has to contend with it, and he prays to God because he discovers Achitophel is not on his side, and Achitophel has joined his son's side, and he says, "Hashem, please turn the counsel, please turn the advice of Achitophel into foolishness." David HaMelech didn't just pray, he prayed publicly that Hashem turns Achitophel's advice into foolishness. You have to remember, Achitophel's advice was extremely great. There are different reasons why he prayed. One is Achitophel's wisdom. His wisdom was so great. David HaMelech said there's no one who could turn Achitophel's wisdom into foolishness, and therefore all I'm left to do is pray to God to do this, because Hashem, being the source of wisdom, Hashem is the only way that Achitophel's wisdom could turn into foolishness. And another opinion says that David HaMelech wasn't praying for it to be foolish, but rather David HaMelech was praying that Achitophel's advice was to be believed like it was foolish. He didn't care about Achitophel's advice, but he wanted people to consider Achitophel to be foolish. Achitophel could give good advice. David HaMelech wasn't concerned about that. But David HaMelech wanted Avshalom to consider Achitophel foolish, and all the other people to consider Achitophel foolish. That way they wouldn't follow it. Because David was very worried that if they followed the advice of Achitophel, as you're going to see soon, David HaMelech would realize that Achitophel knew the right thing to do, and if he were to advise Avshalom, it wouldn't be good for David HaMelech. The third reason why David HaMelech prayed is David HaMelech was actually hoping someone would step forward to help. So David HaMelech was praying to Hashem, but he prayed aloud, saying, Hashem will send someone to help me. Let them hear my pleading to God, and then they'll step forward and they will assist me. Right after David HaMelech prayed to Hashem to turn Achitophel's advice into foolishness, one of David HaMelech's closest friends show up. His name was Chushai ha'arki, and he was an extremely close friend of David HaMelech. He was an old man. He was a loyal friend, and he was not a warrior. The rabbis say he wasn't a warrior. The Rambam brings this down. He wasn't a warrior. He's possibly an old, elderly man, and he's following David HaMelech, and he says, wherever King David goes, I'm going together with him. And David HaMelech told him like this. He said, you're going to be a burden. You're coming along. You're not a warrior. You're not a fighter. You're an old man. You don't belong on the battlefield. You don't belong schlepping out of the city of Jerusalem. You'll be so much more valuable to me if you go back home. And David HaMelech tells Chushai like this. He says, I want you to go to my son, pledge your loyalty, and you have two jobs. You're my official spy. And in spying, you have two jobs you need to do. Number one, you have to undermine the advice of Achitophel. And number two, send spies with reports using the two sons of Evyasa and Tzadok, the two high priests. Send their sons. Tell me what's going on. Tell me what Achitophel's advising Avshalom. Tell me what's actually going on in the capital. That way I can know how to prepare myself accordingly. What's so interesting is that David didn't tell Chushai what to actually say. It almost sounded like David HaMelech couldn't care what Chushai said. The only objective he had to do was hear what Achitophel says and just say the opposite. David HaMelech was so terrified of the accuracy and the potency of Achitophel's advice, he said, the safest advice I could possibly do, whatever the plans are, the best plans would be not what Achitophel says. So he just told Chushai, do whatever you can to ensure that your advice is just in counter to Achitophel's. Even if Achitophel's advice doesn't sound very clever, just say the opposite. And even if your advice is really, really good advice, and as you're going to see, this is kind of what happened, make sure you say your advice so long as it's opposite of him. And Dovid insisted to Chushai that he pledge his loyalty to Avshalom. Now that was something that Chushai wasn't comfortable with. He loved David HaMelech. It sounds like he was not a fan in the slightest of Avshalom. And David HaMelech is now telling him, go and lie and say that you're a fan of Avshalom, when Chushai loved David HaMelech with such an incredible love. But his king told him to do something, so he actually turned around and he went back. The Malbim explains what was Avshalom's motivation. What actually motivated him in this rebellion? What did he want? And it's important to understand this, especially when you're in light of understanding what Achitophel is going to advise him to do. The Malbim says Avshalom was motivated to rebel because he understood that David HaMelech was going to crown Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon. Firstly, he's going to crown him, and secondly, he was going to do this during his own lifetime. David HaMelech wasn't going to wait until he passed away, but David HaMelech was going to do it during his own lifetime. He was going to crown his son, who, by the way, at this time was still only 9 years old. Shlomo was only 9 years old at the time of the rebellion, and so Avshalom said, I want to be the next king, and I can't wait till David HaMelech passes away, because I have reason to believe that he's going to crown the next king during his lifetime, which means I need to actually start the rebellion now. And now he had two ways to proceed. He needed to become king, but he had to do it in two ways. Option number one, and this sounds like this is what Avshalom's preferred option was, is make a rebellion, force David HaMelech to contend with Avshalom, and realize that he was a real force to be dealt with. David HaMelech would kind of officially retire, from public life, and Avshalom would take over. David HaMelech would still be alive, and Avshalom would be the king. And if Avshalom could get that, he didn't want to kill his father. In fact, he was desperately wanted to avoid the stigma associated with killing his father. And so this was his preferred option. Of course, it came with a risk. And the risk was David HaMelech could always change his mind. So long as he's alive, he kind of holding the strings to Avshalom's own kingship. But Avshalom didn't really want to kill his father. He just wanted to be the king, the next king, and he understood that in order to become the next king, he had to become officially a king during the life of David HaMelech. So he needed to put as much pressure on his father in such a way that his father realized the best option would be to just move aside and let his son take over. The second option, of course, that Avshalom understood, if he were not to get option number one, option number two would be not to leave David HaMelech alive and become the official king. And this would, of course, stop David HaMelech from ever supporting anyone else, because that was it. Avshalom would be the king, and David HaMelech wouldn't be able to influence anyone or start to lean towards any other king being an option. Now, David HaMelech knew with certainty that Achitophel was going to advocate towards killing David HaMelech. Achitophel had already proven himself as someone who deeply hated David HaMelech. And even though David HaMelech had so much love towards Achitophel still believed he was supposed to be king. And for him to be a king, David HaMelech had to get out of the picture. Achitophel realized the best way for him to officially become king was to spur a rebellion, to successfully let Avshalom become king, find a pretext to kill Avshalom, and then he'll take over the kingship himself. So Achitophel was highly motivated in Avshalom winning, but not just becoming king, because if David HaMelech was still alive, it wouldn't help Achitophel's case. He needed David HaMelech not to be around. He needed Avshalom to become the next king, and then he needed to do off with Avshalom himself. David HaMelech traveled south, And there's a lot of stories that happen along the way. It's not the scope of this class to talk about it because it doesn't really deal with Achitophel. But Dovid HaMelech meets with Siva, who's a servant of the grandson of King Shaul, who supports him, and it was duplicity. It was a really interesting story. But the point was he tricked Dovid HaMelech, and then Dovid HaMelech came across another relative. Remember, he's going through Binyamin territory. He's going through, the tribe of King Shaul. Not all of them were so supportive of King David. And Shimon ben Gera came out and cursed Dovid HaMelech, and Dovid HaMelech stopped the men from killing him, even though later on Shimon ben Gera got his punishment. And then Dovid HaMelech arrived in the city of Bahurim. Dovid HaMelech was exhausted. He was resting in the city, and meanwhile Avshalom, he's traveling north, and he makes his way into the city of Jerusalem together with Achitophel. And as soon as he does, Chushai Ha'arki, Dovid HaMelech's friend, who's now a double agent essentially, goes to Avshalom and he starts screaming out, Yechi HaMelech, Yechi HaMelech, long live the king, pretending that he approves to Avshalom's kingship. What's really interesting, by the way, he left it vague. The Hamelech says he left it vague because when he was screaming out, long live the king, he didn't say which king, he actually meant Dovid HaMelech. But Avshalom, of course, assumed that someone screaming long live the king in front of him was referring to himself. So he was very flattered, but he was very, very suspicious. Why was he suspicious? Chushai Ha'arki's love of Dovid HaMelech was no secret. Everyone knew how much Chushai loved Dovid HaMelech, and now Dovid HaMelech's Achitophel wasn't such a surprise that he backstabbed Dovid HaMelech. People gathered that feeling from him that he wasn't Dovid HaMelech's biggest fan. But in the case of Chushai, Avshalom was shocked, and Avshalom said, someone that's such a close friend of my father, and during my father's greatest need, he's going to go and support his son. How can I possibly trust you? That's not trustworthy behavior. How could you betray my father? So, he told Chushai, he said it's a double betrayal. Number one, you're not supporting my father during his time of need. And secondly, you could just go to your house and say, I'm not getting involved, and that would already be one betrayal. But supporting my father's enemy, when you're literally such a close friend and such a dedicated supporter of my father, how can I trust you if you do a double betrayal to my father? And Chushai answered very pragmatically, and it's amazing. He was a very wise man, and as sneaky and manipulative as Avshalom was, you could see Chushai was his match. He was his peer in every respect. He knew how to trick Avshalom, just as Avshalom was tricking everyone else around him. Chushai said, my friendship with your father, yes, it's a very, very strong friendship, but it doesn't extend past his role as king. He's my king, and I'm dedicated to him, and because he's my king, I'm therefore such a close friend. But now that your reign has begun, okay, now my allegiance shifts. It's not a friendship and now he's my king. He's a king. Okay, he's not just my king, he's also my friend. Now that you're the king, argued Chushai, now my loyalty is with you. And he said, Hashem's with you, the high court's with you, the people are with you, therefore you're the official king of the Jewish people, and therefore my friendship and my loyalty now belongs to you. A second reason Chushai said for Avshalom not to be suspicious, he said, I'm not betraying Dovid HaMelech. In fact, I'm the biggest advocate of Dovid HaMelech. I just believe that my good friend's making a mistake. He hasn't appointed you king, and you're rightfully the next one in line. I'm not betraying Dovid HaMelech. I'm just showing Dovid HaMelech he should make the right choice, and he should appoint you to be the next one in line. And this actually, the second reason, really kind of feels... it flows with the rest of the story, where you see Chushai was pretended to be supportive of Avshalom as an extension of King David. He said, I love my best friend Dovid HaMelech, and I just, I want him to make the right choice and be good for the kingdom to officially appoint Avshalom to be the next king. And the Hamelech actually points out as well, in this regard, he says, the reason why Chushai's the fact that Chushai's explanation actually made sense, because Chushai, in the explanation, he didn't say he hates Dovid HaMelech. Achitophel was very much against Dovid HaMelech, and he made no secret of it, and his intentions made it even clearer. In the case of Chushai said, I love Dovid HaMelech. I just want Dovid HaMelech to make the right choice in regards to his successor. The fact that Avshalom didn't recoil from that answer shows that at this point, Avshalom really had no intention of killing his father. He just wanted to be the next king, whatever it took. Now, if he needed to kill his father, he would kill his father. That's not what he wanted to do at this point, and he had every intention of making sure that he could keep his father alive, and he could just be the next king. So now that he's officially in Yerushalayim, his father literally ran together with a small group of loyalists. And Avshalom calls his advisors in and tells his advisors, "Help me out, become partners with me in the coup against my father." He wanted them to advise, but he didn't want them to all be passive participants and be able to claim, he wanted them to be active members of the rebellion. So he says, "Okay, give me advice." Now, in this particular case, the only person that gave advice was Achitophel. And unfortunately, it becomes one of the most dreadful stories in Jewish history, because Achitophel was the only one to give advice. And in order to understand how Achitophel's advice was accepted, you have to understand Achitophel was considered, and literally the verse says this right here, it was like you're talking to God. Achitophel's advice was so precise, it was like prophecy, it was like God talking to you. People didn't question Achitophel. Unfortunately, that's a very big problem. You need to question things. If a prophet says something in the name of God, okay, but if a regular person says something, even if he's an angel-like type of wisdom, an angel-like type of person, and he's such a deep, wise man, you need to question it. You can't just accept things just because someone wise said them. Achitophel gives his advice, and no one else, Chushai, doesn't get a chance to say anything. Achitophel just says, he tells Avshalom, "You have a big problem on your hands. You have so many people across the country who are so loyal and dedicated to you, but everyone knows the big elephant in the room, that if Dovid Hamelech somehow succeeds in winning the war, all the people that rebelled against Dovid Hamelech, they're going to get punished. But the only person who's not is Avshalom. Avshalom's the son of the king. He's probably going to slap on his wrist and he'll be fine." Achitophel told Avshalom, if you want to really garner national support, and you want all of them to really fight for you with a real passion, you need to show the nation, you need to show everyone that you're very much on their team, and that you have as much to risk as they have, that you have to do something so deeply personal against your father, they realize there's no coming back. And just as they're in big trouble if Dovid Hamelech wins, Achitophel argued to Avshalom, you need to show the people that you're also going to be in big trouble if Dovid Hamelech wins. Now, what was Achitophel's motive? What did he want? He wanted Avshalom to do a capital offense. Because if he were to do a capital offense, when everything finished, when Avshalom succeeded in winning the war and getting rid of his father, Achitophel will then bring Avshalom to court and say, you just did a capital offense, you did something so serious that Torah law requires that you be killed, and that would be an easy way to do off with Avshalom. So Achitophel said, Nosson the prophet already predicted that someone from Dovid Hamelech's family was going to disgrace Dovid Hamelech and sleep with Dovid Hamelech's wives in public. Achitophel told Avshalom, the only thing you could do right now is you need to oppress Dovid Hamelech's wives in public, and you need to show everyone that you're doing this, and the word will spread. Dovid Hamelech will hear what happened, and all the rest of the Jewish people will hear what a dreadful, disgusting thing you did. You're violating the king's wives, and thereby you'll be on the same team with all the Jewish people with everything to lose if Dovid Hamelech wins. What's so crazy is that Avshalom carried it through. He didn't question him. And again, it shows you, firstly, I guess, the depravity that Avshalom had led himself to, how compelling and deeply evil Achitophel was, and also how respected Achitophel's wisdom was. He gave wisdom with such preciseness and accuracy. At this point, he had a track record for giving good advice that people just didn't question it. They just said, okay, I guess that's all right. And so he did it. One of the most horrifying stories in Jewish history. Achitophel violated the wives of Dovid Hamelech, the 10 wives that were concubines, but still they had the status of wives who Dovid Hamelech had left behind, never imagining that his son would do something so dreadful. And that's exactly what happened. Now, what's so crazy, and the rabbis bring this down, that as bad as this advice, as evil and perverted as this advice was, the Radak brings down, it was precise advice. that Achitophel wasn't tricking Avshalom, just giving him bad advice. He was giving him evil, manipulative, disgusting advice, but the advice itself was sound. When people saw what Avshalom did, they actually, it did garner incredible support. His supporters thought, oh wow, Avshalom is really on our side, and if Avshalom loses, there's no way that Dovid HaMelech is going to let him off the hook. And they became fiercely loyal to Avshalom, because they said, okay, he's really ready to do this, and if he's ready to do this, we're ready to do this too. Now, that was to garner the support. Avshalom now had the support. The next step, and this all happens straight away, within quick succession of each other, the next step was to actually work out how to attack his father, how to show Dovid HaMelech that he was serious, and that Dovid HaMelech should kind of resign and fold before Avshalom. Achitophel came to Avshalom and told Avshalom, I have a good advice for you. What you need to do is, and it was a 5-pronged advice. He said, don't wage a full force attack against your father. The time it will take to gather all the Jewish people together, it'll be too long. What you should do is get 12,000 warriors, 1,000 from each tribe, so everyone's involved. Get the fiercest, most extreme warriors you could get, an elite group of 12,000 warriors. And he told him, secondly, that was part number 1. Part number 2, he said, Avshalom, you're not to join the battle. If you join the battle, you run the risk of getting killed. And also, you run the risk of having pity on your father. So he said, you don't go, I'll lead the men. And he said also, and he didn't want Avshalom to have pity for his father, so he needed this to be very compelling. Achitophel told Avshalom, if you go to war, it's going to be a stigma for the rest of your life. You're the one that's the king that killed his father. You'll never be able to outlive that. You'll never be able to outrun that. So he said, what you do instead is, send me. I'm the perfect person to go, because if I kill Dovid HaMelech, everyone's going to say, well, he's just avenging his granddaughter's husband. Remember, Dovid HaMelech, under a rightful pretext, had Uriah Hittite, his wife's previous husband, killed, or wasn't officially a husband. Again, discussion for a different class. But the point was, Achitophel had really good reason to want Dovid HaMelech killed in the public eye. So Achitophel tells Avshalom, you stay back. Number one, you might get killed, and in his own mind he's thinking, I don't want Avshalom on the battlefield because he's going to spare his father's life, and I need Dovid HaMelech to be killed in the battlefield. And so he says, let me go instead. It won't be much of a stain for me, because everyone understands that, I have a good reason to not like Dovid HaMelech. The third part of Achitophel's advice was attack at night. Dovid HaMelech is still weak. Achitophel understood that in the face of such sorrow, what would Dovid HaMelech be doing? He'd be fasting and be crying to God. And so he said, if I attack Dovid HaMelech right now, there is no chance that he has energy. He'll be so weak from fasting and crying to Hashem that he'll be so easy to attack. And also, if we attack at night, we'll be able to frighten the men. We'll attack so quickly, they won't be expected. Everyone's going to run in all different directions. The only person who's not going to run is Dovid HaMelech. He's not going to run away. And therefore, we'll have Dovid HaMelech all alone. We won't have to kill as many people. We'll go to a full-scale war, so many people are going to die. And he understood that Avshalom doesn't want people dead. He wants as large of a kingdom as possible. Part number 4 of his advice was that Dovid HaMelech actually be killed. Achitophel was wavering back and forth. Does Dovid HaMelech actually have to be killed, or could we just put Dovid HaMelech in a tight spot that he'll agree to let me be the next king, and he could live? And he didn't want to kill his father. But Achitophel's advice was, no, you have to. If you want to be a king, you need to make sure that your father is killed in the battle. And the 5th part of the Achitophel's plan, which is kind of connected to the 3rd one, at least in the way that Abarbanel breaks it down, he says that Dovid HaMelech should be the only one killed, and no one else needs to die in the battle. Only the king needs to die in order for Avshalom to be king, and then afterwards all those people will come back home officially loyal subjects to the king's son, Avshalom. Now, Avshalom liked the advice of Achitophel. At the same time, he decided, unlike the first time around, he decided he needs to get more advice. So he went to the rest of his advice and said, Achitophel gave good advice, but what other advice would you suggest to me? And this was Chushai Arki's chance, and of course this is what really changed the entire entire focus of the war and the success of the war as well. But the question is, why did Avshalom not take Achitophel's advice? The first time around, doing one of the most devastating, disgusting, horrific behavior in public, literally on the roof of the castle so everyone could see, he didn't question it. And now, suddenly he's questioning Achitophel's plan. What happened in between? One opinion is, Achitophel was still bothered about the idea of killing his father. So when Achitophel insisted that this is what has to happen, Avshalom said, before we go ahead and do this, let's actually get someone else's advice. So he reached out to his other advisors, giving Achitophel a chance to step forward and present another argument. And the second opinion is that Hashem listened to the prayers of Dovid Hamelech. Dovid Hamelech begged that people wouldn't take Achitophel's advice seriously, and so now Avshalom, for no good reason, was saying, you know what? I'd like to hear another opinion because something doesn't sit right with me. So Chushai stood up and Chushai gave his arguments. He very cleverly, instead of just going on the full attack of Achitophel, Chushai stood up and did something that would have shocked everyone, which is rather shocking entirely. He told Avshalom, I agree with Achitophel's original advice. Achitophel's original advice is very good advice. What he told you to violate the wives of Dovid Hamelech. Now, why would he have said that? Because it was already done. Of course, Chushai didn't believe that was good advice. That was disgusting, was horrific, one of the worst sins that exist, if not the worst sin that exists, violating the king's wives, violating anyone's wives. It's disgusting, it's depraved. But Chushai said, it's already done. And if I make it sound like, I agree with Achitophel, he's a wise man, I'm on his team and I'm on your team, I agree with advice number one, this time he's wrong. It's very clever, but again, he was using Avshalom's manipulative behavior, but now against him, he was manipulating Avshalom. So he made it sound like I'm on Avshalom's team. I agreed with the first idea, but in this case, no, it's not a good idea. And he gives 3 reasons, according to the Barbanel, 3 reasons why Achitophel's plan wasn't sustainable. It wasn't a good plan. He said, if you're going to chase after a king that just escaped his capital city, is in deep distress, you know that it makes sense to chase him with an elite squad and just quickly attack. But you're not dealing with a regular king and you're not dealing with regular soldiers. Dovid Hamelech is one of the greatest warriors in human history. You think you're going to attack him from behind and you're just going to succeed like that? You're dealing with a man whose entire career has been successful campaign after successful campaign, a warrior par excellence. You can't just surprise attack someone like this. He said, secondly, attacking such a skilled warrior would be a bad idea, but the state of desperation that Dovid and his men are in right now, it's the worst idea to attack him. They have nothing to lose. They're out of the capital city. They've been chased out by their own sons. It's going to be such a bad idea to attack them when in such a state of desperation. Wait for things to calm down. Wait for them to not have that wild angst that's going to make them unstoppable. When they're more calm and collected, then you could fight them in a more organized way. And Chushai argued, thirdly, Dovid Hamelech isn't trapped in a city. He's out somewhere in the wilderness. And how are you going to find him? He said it's like a bear that lost its children, a forlorn mother bear. It's in deep state of agony. It's wild and it's roaming around outside the city. You get 100 men to try to trap it. There's nothing to be done. That bear is unstoppable and that bear is untrappable. And additionally, Chushai argued, and this is the Mamelech and the Malbim bring it down, that Chushai argued, Dovid Hamelech, he's an expert. He knows what you're planning, and he's probably lying in ambush, waiting for an attack from the rear, waiting for an elite squad to come, and you think you're going to surprise him. You can't surprise such a master of war. Now, why? What's the big deal? Who cares? So the first Achitophel and 12,000 men all attack and they lose. Why would that be such a problem? Chushai said, this is a nightmare. This will become the very beginning, the beginning and end of your campaign. If you want to have a successful battle against Dovid Hamelech, you have to make sure that your first campaign is successful, because if you lose your first campaign, you're going to send 12,000 men. They're going to get wiped in a second by Dovid Hamelech, who's a fierce warrior, surrounded by the fiercest, most loyal warriors, who are in such a state of desperation. And across Israel, they're all going to hear Dovid Hamelech crushes the rebellion in an instant. And Chushai argued to Avshalom, everyone's going to remember in an instant that 37 years David Hamelech has been leading campaign after campaign of successful wars and battles, and the second you get crushed in your first battle, they're going to remember, wait a second, going against David Hamelech is not a good idea, and you're going to lose national support in an instant. Morale will be over. You think you have nothing to lose. Okay, you just lose 12,000 men in Achitophel. He says, no, morale's going to be over. Everyone's going to remember that, wait a second, the person we're going against is David Hamelech. So Chushai said, okay, you want real advice, you want good advice? Achitophel's a smart man and all, but in this particular case he's wrong. Chushai argued, in this particular case, what you need to do is, you need to gather every single supporter, from Dan to Beersheba, as numerous as the sand by the sea, and you need to personally lead them into battle. You need to have every single person on your team all gathered together and wage a full-scale, massive war against David Hamelech, and then you'll be able to actually assure victory. You have such a massive amount of people with you, and it sounded like that the amount of people that could be gathered would be so much greater than the small amount of people that David Hamelech would be able to gather, and David Hamelech will then retreat. And if David Hamelech retreats into a city, you'll take ropes in the city, you'll take down the bricks, there won't even be a pebble to be found. And Chushai's argument was, instead of rushing into a battle that you're definitely going to lose, destroying your rebellion in a moment, plan this out properly, gather a far more numerous army, and go to a full-scale war against a king who's outside of his city in the middle of nowhere. Chushai argued that's a far better plan. Now, what's crazy is Chushai's argument is very compelling. It really is very logical. And Chushai also did something very clever. In the actual verses, you notice something very interesting. He uses a lot of poetry. A lot of really fancy words and poetic, like sand by the sea, encamped around him like dew on the ground. Take ropes and haul it into the ravine. Even not a pebble can be found. All these really interesting words, all these fancy poetic words. Chushai was manipulating Avshalom. Avshalom loved fancy words. He would use that on everyone. He always thought he was so clever because he was manipulating everyone else. Chushai said, if he's so attracted to manipulation, he is obviously going to be very receptive to that too. So Chushai used on the master manipulator manipulation, because he understood this is the language he talks. So he started using fancy poetic words, and Avshalom was captivated. He was like, this sounds like a really good plan. This sounds so wonderful. Now, it actually does sound like a really good plan. The only thing is, Achitophel's advice was so far superior and was absolutely right. And the rabbis say, and the Malbim brings it down exactly like this. He says, had Avshalom listened to Achitophel, Avshalom would have won the war. He actually would have succeeded. Achitophel's advice was absolutely precise, and Chushai's advice was not good. Even though Avshalom found himself captivated by Chushai's advice, and Chushai's advice really did sound compelling, and sounded really dangerous, sounded like a lot of people were going to die, a lot of people did die. The Avshalom should have listened to Achitophel, and had he listened to Achitophel's advice, he would have won the war. It shows you what a clever person Achitophel was. He was a wise man. He was a great scholar in Torah. He knew so much wisdom. Unfortunately, though, he had something very rotten inside of him. And in the next class, we'll discuss exactly how it proceeded from there, how it all went south because of Avshalom not listening to the advice of Achitophel.